Hello, guys. Today I want to introduce you to a very interesting and frightening story. It's quite old, and some of you may have heard it before. Personally, I wasn't familiar with it, and I assume that for some of you, just like for me, this story will be completely new. That's why I decided to narrate it. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. Have a pleasant listen. The house was old. At least 100 years old. Thick brick walls, ceilings nearly 3 meters high, parquet flooring even in the shared hallway. These kinds of buildings are pleasant to live in. You can feel the space, the volume. Of course, there are drawbacks: ancient pipes, indestructible basement mosquitoes. But this house, along with all its pros and cons, had one more flaw. A completely insane layout. The entrance to my apartment was located at the very end of a separate corridor. In fact, it was the only door in that corridor at all. I didn't even know what my neighbors looked like. I suspect this arrangement existed because the building had been expanded in stages, and my apartment was either added later or once had a separate entrance. This matters only because I had a very poor understanding of the building's internal structure. After several turns, I completely lost my sense of direction, and only the view and logic told me that I didn't live in a corner apartment. The apartment was rented. Some elderly people had lived there before, but their children had taken them in, and the place became available. Since I found the apartment through acquaintances, there were no issues with moving in or the lease terms. We agreed that I'd do some light renovations and get rid of the old furniture. Thankfully, that part was easy. No one was eager to defend the old Soviet wardrobes and cabinets. That's when I found the window. That day was sunny. A few small clouds drifted lazily across the sky. The weather was perfect. Unfortunately, I wasn't enjoying it. I was fighting with one of the old wardrobes. Its back panel, made of about a dozen thick oak planks, was screwed directly into the wall. Strictly speaking, the entire wardrobe was hanging on those boards, and dismantling it turned into a nightmare. Soaked in sweat, I finally defeated the damned panel and, to my surprise, discovered a window behind it. Old, gray with age and weather. Faded shutters, dirty glass, and a thin, weak light seeping in from outside. I was genuinely shocked to find a window on the far wall of the apartment. After dealing with the boards, I opened it and looked outside. It faced a small inner courtyard, or rather, a well. I saw no entrance, no exit. What was even stranger, I saw no other windows at all. It seemed this one had simply been punched through the wall for the previous owner's convenience. Shrugging, I closed it and returned to my uneven battle with the furniture. The window bothered me. I had planned to install a pull-up bar where the wardrobe had been, but the cursed hole in the wall changed everything. I even considered bricking it up, but then decided it would be much better to place my work desk by the window. The courtyard outside was small, and judging by everything, the sun only reached it during summer noon. Above the window, there was a small canopy, clearly meant to protect it from rain. The inner walls of the courtyard were painted a light orange color. Quite pleasant, actually. And strangely enough, the paint hadn't suffered from the elements. Probably because the sun rarely reached it, the paint hadn't faded or peeled. A month passed. I finally got my life in order and arranged the apartment to my liking. I slept, ate, lived, completely unaware of what lay beyond those old shutters. I noticed it for the first time on a miserable day. Rain hammered against the windows. I had just come home, soaked to the bone and angry as hell. A day that had started with a clear sky turned into a biblical flood in just 2 hours. As luck would have it, I couldn't get a taxi. The city was paralyzed by traffic, and no one wanted to take the order. After changing clothes and taking a hot shower, I sat down with a book. I wasn't in the mood to work or watch anything, and reading helped distract me. Deciding that the desk was the most comfortable spot, I dropped into my chair and immersed myself in the book. Thankfully, the sunlight from the window provided excellent lighting. Then it hit me. That window hadn't had sunlight half an hour ago. Maybe an hour. I jumped up as if stung and stared blankly at the courtyard, flooded with sunlight. Had the rain ended that quickly? Confused, I went to the other windows. Rain. Clouds. But here, sunlight. Invisible source, but unmistakably illuminating the azure of a clear sky. My hands began to shake. That's it. Straight to the madhouse. Staring at the window as if it were about to leap at me, I backed out of the room and went to the kitchen. First, strong coffee. Then some cognac. No. A lot of cognac. Even more, for the nerves. Then a cigarette. Rain tapped against the windows outside, insisting that it couldn't be raining everywhere while there was sun there. A natural anomaly. I rested my head in my hand, took a deep drag, and started coughing. Yes, I smoke very rarely. All right. If my mind has snapped, technology, man's best friend, won't fail me. Right? Armed with my phone, I peeked into the room. The window cheerfully shone with a sunny day. With trembling hands, I aimed the camera and took a photo. For a moment, the screen went dark. I was already prepared to see a solid wall instead of the window, and myself in the firm grip of orderlies. But nothing like that happened. The phone faithfully displayed a rectangle of sunlight where the window was. This was insane. That couldn't happen. Or maybe it could. I frantically ran through my options. Tell someone, but who? Friends? I had one or two people I trusted, but what if this was dangerous? Then I'd be putting their lives at risk, and that was unacceptable. Pacing the apartment, I weighed every pro and con of telling anyone. In the end, I decided it would be better to do some reconnaissance myself first, and only then decide what to do next. The following week was spent preparing. I bought climbing gear, ropes, carabiners, harnesses, all the necessary equipment. I decided to start with the simplest thing, a descent. And so, a week and 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, I ate a light breakfast and went to the window. I pushed the desk aside, secured the ropes in several places, so that if even one knot failed, the others would catch me. I leaned out the window up to my waist and looked around. Smooth walls. The canopy. Somewhere a floor above, the edge of the roof. The ground was about 4 meters below. I had somehow forgotten that I lived on the second floor. Taking a deep breath and tugging the rope a couple of times to test it, I slid out the window and let my legs hang. A fine tremor ran through me, one small step for a man. Carefully, I began lowering myself. Eventually, I was dangling a couple of meters above the ground, clinging to the canopy with my hands. Swearing under my breath, I pushed off the wall and dropped. The ground slammed painfully into my feet, and I fell onto my side. Nothing broken, apparently. I stood up and looked around. Nothing extraordinary. Packed earth beneath my feet, walls all around, and the lone window I had climbed out of. I tilted my head back and looked at the sky. It was clean and blue. Was it ever any different here? I drew a deep breath, about to shout something, but stopped myself immediately. Who knew what might happen here? What if I attracted a predator? Suppressing the scream that was ready to burst out, I exhaled loudly. Well then. Expedition to the other world, over. Time to go home. Grunting and wheezing, I climbed back up. Blood pounded in my ears like a blacksmith's hammer, and my heart felt ready to leap out of my chest. Not because of the climb, for meters wasn't much. I was just completely on edge. Hands shaking. Head spinning. Another world. It certainly looked like one. Millions, no, billions, of questions, ideas, and plans swarmed my mind. No. Calm down. With great effort, I pulled myself together and, giggling like an idiot, sank into my chair. Plans for Operation Roof were already unfolding in my head. A month. That's how long it took me to prepare the second stage. After buying materials, I managed to build something like a balcony, jutting 2 meters out from the window. I also replaced the old opening with proper double-glazed windows, no need for drafts, and installed a rolling shutter under the canopy outside. You never know what kind of nasty things might live out there. I also figured out the best way to reach the roof. The answer was obvious. Build a ladder. That turned out to be complicated. Placing a 5-meter ladder on a narrow 2-meter balcony was a terrible idea. In the end, I bought 24 steel brackets and made an improvised climbing ladder by hammering them directly into the wall. It took several days, mostly because I spent a long time experimenting with how to secure them properly. My first attempts nearly killed me. One of the brackets tore loose, and I fell from the height of the 3rd floor straight toward the ground. I was saved only because my leg got tangled in a rope hanging from the balcony. Breaking a couple of boards, I ended up dangling upside down. Eventually, the work was done. I looked with satisfaction at the miracle of my engineering genius, a crooked, uneven chain of brackets stretching all the way to the roof's edge. When I hammered in the last one, it took tremendous willpower not to look over the edge. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, not a sneaky peek past a sheet metal roof. And then the day came. I prepared thoroughly. A backpack with food for the day, a sleeping mat, extra water, a flashlight, my ropes and harnesses, and my main weapon, a camera. I borrowed it from a friend, along with a telephoto lens, a macro lens, and a standard wide angle. And of course, a compass. I forgot to bring a tripod, but even without it, the gear made me nervous during the climb. I stared stubbornly at the metal roof. There, its edge. A strip of sky. No, buddy. Hold on. Pull yourself up. Stand. Breathe. Adjust. Closing my eyes, I lifted my head and waited a few seconds for my heart to calm before opening them. What would I see? A paradise garden? A scorched desert? An endless steppe? Mist with jagged rocks jutting from it? Honestly, I was a little disappointed. The sight wasn't very impressive. Lonely stone monoliths, like icebergs, were frozen in waves of drifting fog. At times, the fog spiraled upward 40 meters high, forming bizarre rings and curls. I walked toward the edge of the roof, counting my steps. 8. 30. 100. I stopped and looked back. Interesting. I had walked a full 100 steps, but visually the distance was only 20 or 30 meters. Spatial anomalies. An unpleasant chill ran down my spine. If space was distorted here, then time might be too. A sudden thought struck me. What if, while I walked those 100 steps, an entire day passed back home? I had work the day after tomorrow. Strangely enough, the fear of being late for work completely overpowered my desire to explore this strange world. I ran back. 3. 5. I nearly flew straight down into my courtyard. What the hell? I turned around. Right. 20 meters there, 100 steps. Back, 8. Very convenient for running away. After climbing down, I rushed to the computer. Date. Time. Come on. With trembling hands, I opened the calendar on the second try. Same day. Only 20 minutes had passed. Exhaling loudly, I sat down. Time was fine. Well then, back we go. Anxiety gave way to excitement again, and after a quick sandwich, I returned. Back on the roof, I remembered something I'd always wanted to check as a kid. The compass. I pulled it out and stared intently at the needle. It spun halfway around and froze, pointing north. I lifted my head to estimate the sun's position, and froze, jaw hanging open. There was no sun. Looking around, I realized something else. There were no shadows at all. It was as if someone had taken an overcast day and simply added color and contrast. For some reason, that disturbed me deeply. Light from nowhere. Mysticism. Then again, windows leading to other worlds aren't exactly everyday occurrences either. I headed back toward the roof's edge, keeping an eye on the compass. The needle stubbornly pointed in the same direction. This time, the edge was 70 steps away. I noted the number and looked down. From the outside, the building looked badly weathered. Empty window sockets stared mournfully at the bleak, fog-covered landscape. The fog rolled against the walls in tidal waves, like a boundless young ocean. I thought I saw movement down below, but no matter how hard I stared, I couldn't make anything out. After surveying the area, I began circling the roof's perimeter. The metal flexed under my feet, groaning as it bent beneath my weight. I took a few wide-angle photos, then attached the telephoto lens and snapped several shots of one of the distant rocks. The perimeter check revealed only one thing. There was no way down. At least, I couldn't find one. At the same time, I noticed that the fog, at least it seemed to me, had risen slightly higher. I wasn't completely sure until, after circling another side of the building, I noticed that the fog had already risen to the level of the second-floor windows. Earlier, it had barely reached the tops of the first-floor ones. For some reason, that made me uneasy. At the same time, I only then realized that it was getting dark. Earlier the sky had been filled with clear azure, but now it was evenly filling with the crimson of sunset. I have to admit, all of this made me deeply uncomfortable. More importantly, I noticed that for the first time, shadows had appeared. Huge boulders scattered across the valley now resembled a colossal fist slowly clenching. Every shadow was directed toward me, or at least toward my house. I hurried back. Step 2. Step 10. Step 100. But my courtyard wasn't getting any closer. I broke into a run. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being chased. After 20 minutes, drenched in sweat and with my heart tearing itself apart, I nearly flew off the damn roof. I turned around and saw the fog beginning to dance at roof level in the embers of the dying day. One more minute, and it would rush toward me. Slipping on the steps, I scrambled down. The boards cracked pitifully as I jumped over half a meter of steps, landing with all my weight, and tumbled headlong into the apartment. I slammed the window shut and dropped the shutter with a metallic clang. Inside, there was deathly silence and pitch darkness. Switching on my flashlight, I made my way to the light switch and turned it on, immediately staring at the window. But all I could see was the lowered shutter and the glare of my flashlight reflecting off it. Without even undressing, utterly exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep without dreams. I opened one eye and scanned the room. My body ached from yesterday's run. A light bulb glowed warmly under the ceiling. Groaning, I got up and stretched. Glancing out the regular window that faced my familiar street, I confirmed it, another overcast day outside. I looked sideways at the strange window and its shutter. No expeditions today. I had work tomorrow, no way I was running from fog again. Repeating that thought to myself, I smirked. Idiot. A house in the middle of a swamp. Fog is normal for a swamp, even on a clear day. And in the evening, evaporation condenses better. That's why it rises. You've invented mysticism out of nothing, you idiot. The day passed in routine. Whatever my suspicions about the window and the fog were, I tried to forget them. Only in the evening did I sit down at the computer to review the photos. To my great disappointment, every single one of them was overexposed. That was complete nonsense. Digital photos don't overexpose like that. A disturbing thought made me shudder. Radiation. Jesus Christ, you paranoid investigator. What if it's irradiated like Chernobyl, and I was walking around there in nothing but jeans and a t-shirt. That thought robbed me of sleep. All night long I tossed and turned, mentally preparing to wake up bald, my organs turning into jelly. Morning came. No signs of radiation sickness. Still, I ordered a Geiger counter. When it arrived, it was the first thing I put into my backpack. I won't bore you with the details of the tests and experiments. I'll just say this: there was no radiation there. None at all. Not even background radiation. I never stayed outside for more than half an hour and mostly studied the physical properties of the newly discovered world. For example, I discovered that distance there depends on desire. The stronger you want to reach something, the farther you have to walk. Apparently, my escape from the fog succeeded only because I was thinking more about not coughing my lungs out than about escaping the danger itself. Sometimes, by clearing my mind of all desires, I could cross the entire roof in 3 steps. Once, I forgot my notebook at home and must have walked half a kilometer before I reached the courtyard. I also discovered another important property. The compass wasn't pointing north. It was pointing at the window. I spent an entire day walking the area back and forth, testing this hypothesis. One of the most significant experiments was determining the level of the fog tide at night. I found a special paint that was sensitive to humidity. It turned a poisonous yellow in the fog. After painting a 3-meter board with it, I installed it vertically on the roof. In the morning, I checked the result. Exactly 2 meters, plus a couple of streaks up to 3. Apparently, surges like the ones I had observed earlier. The next step was Project Tower. It took almost 3 months, but in the end, I built it, a 5-meter observation tower. It was truly hellish work. I never thought that building something like that alone could be so difficult. Still, eventually, the last nail was driven in, and I was ready. During construction, I also installed a small winch at the top, which greatly simplified lifting even large and heavy loads onto the roof. To be honest, I was terrified. No, worse. I was so afraid that I postponed my nighttime expedition for almost 4 days. The tower, coated with the sensitive paint, showed that some fog surges reached 4 meters. Given how much it frightened me, it took time before I dared to spend the night on that tower. Dressing warmly, stocking up on food, 2 thermoses of hot tea, lights, including 2 kerosene lamps, 2 electric lamps, and a couple of chemical glow sticks, I set out. I climbed onto the tower just as darkness began to fall. From that height, I could see much more clearly. The house stood in the center of a vast valley, at its very bottom. The fog I thought was rising at night was actually filling the valley, flowing in from somewhere beyond. The first couple of hours brought nothing new. The fog churned and rolled against the walls of my house. Then it spilled over the edge of the roof, and thousands of ghostly serpents rushed toward me. I watched their graceful dance of shadows. In its own way, it was beautiful, though the silent advance of that pale wall nearly forced me to climb down and flee home. The sky, gradually turning crimson, became black-red, and finally, the last colors faded. Above me stretched a dome of absolute darkness. The gloom, pushed back only by my 2 lights, seemed to grow thicker with every passing moment. I could literally feel an elastic sphere of darkness tightening around me. As claustrophobia began to close in, I lit one of the kerosene lamps. It helped, but only for a short while. The dance of living fire, its warmth and soft, steady light pushed away the dark thoughts and feelings for a time. I even worked up the courage to tie one electric flashlight to a rope and lower it from the tower into the raging sea of fog below. I'm not entirely sure what I saw, but it seemed to me that a huge, pale, ghostly hand, about 3 meters long and woven entirely from fog, reached out to grab it. Before it could, the hand tore apart in midair, shredding into wisps that were instantly scattered. Aside from the soul-freezing sensation that I was being watched, the night passed calmly. As the sky grew lighter, the fog retreated, and within an hour the valley returned to its familiar appearance. A week later, I finally decided to share my discovery with friends. Considering that I hadn't encountered anything overtly dangerous beyond the window, I chose to let a few of my closest friends in on my secret. We agreed to keep it quiet for as long as possible. We had no illusions. Sooner or later we'd either let it slip or simply get tired of the whole thing and hand it over to the authorities. But giving up the glory of being pioneers without a fight didn't sit right with us. Idiots. So now the team consisted of me, Garrick, and Slava. We'd studied together at university, and I knew both of them inside out. Garrick hesitated the most, constantly trying to convince us that this was a terrible idea. "This mysticism freaks me out," he said. "My soul's in my heels." Slava talked him into staying, solemnly swearing that at the first sign of danger, we'd shut everything down and report it to the proper authorities. Naturally, our first joint expedition happened a week later. During that time, I shared everything I had learned, from the properties of space itself to my theories about the fog and its tides. Seeing the other world with their own eyes proved far more convincing than any arguments. Garrick, who until the very last moment had assumed I was messing with him and that this was all some elaborate prank, fell silent at the sight of the endless sea of fog. He was also the one who noticed something interesting. The several dozen rocks visible around us seemed to be arranged in ascending order. And overall, the landscape resembled some kind of gigantic flower, with us standing right at its center. In short, my friends got hooked. Evenings were spent arguing and building theories. They stayed over at my place almost more often than at their own. Maybe because of their constant presence, I didn't immediately notice the changes. I don't know how else to describe it, but the apartment itself began to change. No, things weren't disappearing, and there was no obvious supernatural activity. It was subtler than that. Sometimes it felt like my cup of tea was right next to me. I'd reach out for it, only to find it was much farther away than I thought. Yet if I repeated the motion while staring directly at it, everything worked fine. Slava explained it as us getting used to that strange light and subconsciously misjudging distances. I found the explanation fairly convincing and started paying closer attention to my movements. Oddities still happened from time to time, but I chalked them up to lapses in concentration. Our first real breakthrough happened by accident. Since I'd been obsessing over the window for the past 6 months, the apartment had started to resemble a dorm room. Empty bottles of water, beer, and juice piled up, heaps of dirty dishes, stacks of pizza boxes. And I still hadn't thrown out the old shutters. Slava was idly poking at them with a knife when he noticed markings, more precisely, their remnants. After cleaning layers of grime and paint off the frames, we realized he was right. Both the inside and outside of the shutters were covered in intricate patterns of strange symbols. A couple of hours of internet searching led us to conclude that they most closely resembled Indian scripts. Some symbols were unfamiliar, but others could be loosely interpreted as Hindi. Unfortunately, translating them proved impossible. It looked like the ramblings of a madman, a random collection of letters and nothing more. Trying to feed the phonetics into Google Translate produced an incomprehensible mess of howls, rasps, and guttural cries. "Some Lovecraft stuff," Garrick commented. "Cthulhu in a tank." Still, the discovery unsettled us. Digging deeper, we found claims that such symbols on windows could serve as wards against evil spirits, and that damaging them was extremely unwise. We laughed nervously and brushed it off for about half an hour. Then, just in case, we decided to recreate the symbols on the window frame. I'd bet anything that each of us was thinking the same thing. Please let this just be superstitious nonsense. It took about an hour. Permanent marker standing guard against evil spirits. I smirked to myself. Ghostbusters. Still, we kept working. When it was done, we stood there in silence, staring at the window. I reached out and shut it, turning the handle downward. For a full minute, we stared at the frame, waiting, though I'm not sure for what. A horrifying face on the other side. An unearthly wail. A ghost slamming against the glass, its features twisted with rage. After a minute of silence, we exhaled. And then a heavy thud came from above, making us jump. Then another. Then loud swearing from the neighbors. We burst out laughing as the tension drained away. That evening, we threw a small party. After polishing off a case of beer, drunk and satisfied, we said our goodbyes. I went to my room, my friends went home. That night, I was plagued by nightmares. I was desperately running from a churning wall of fog through the winding corridors of my own house. The hallways twisted endlessly, never ending. I kept running, unable to shake the crushing sense of hopelessness, despair, and pure animal terror that drove me forward. I woke up completely drained, as if I'd run a marathon. My friends complained of feeling awful too. Looking at their crumpled faces on Skype, I knew they understood the same thing I did. The night had been bad for all of us. A week passed. We gradually forgot about that terrible night. The nightmares, having visited us once, didn't return. And, as far as I could tell, the spatial oddities stopped as well. I chalked it up to psychological effects and reduced tension. Eventually, we worked up the courage for another expedition. We decided to kill two birds with one stone. First, Garrick had found something in my overexposed photos. According to him, the overexposure wasn't uniform. Some parts of the images differed slightly in gradient, resembling fog. Given its maximum level, he suggested taking photos from the tower, and also setting a camera to video mode and leaving it recording overnight. Second, Slava proposed a rather bold experiment, leaving a live rat in the fog overnight and seeing what would happen. We argued about that for a long time, but eventually gave in. After all, better a rat than a human. And really, what could be so terrible about fog? Though that last part felt more like self-persuasion. That evening, as the sky began to fill with crimson, we set out on our daring mission. Slava and I stepped a few paces back from the edge of the roof and placed the cage with the rat. The animal showed no signs of distress, calmly grooming itself. We added food, poured fresh water, and covered the cage with a warm blanket. Nights were cold, and freezing the poor creature wasn't part of the plan. Meanwhile, Garrick worked on the tower. After snapping several panoramic shots on the digital camera, he did the same with the film one. He didn't check the results. Dusk was closing in, we had to hurry. After setting up a couple of cameras connected to uninterrupted power supplies, Garrick climbed down. A few minutes later, we were back inside, shut the window, and lowered the shutter. None of us wanted to watch the pale, shifting mass outside, so we focused on the photos. At first, I thought I was looking at the wrong image, until I noticed the familiar fence at the bottom of the frame. It stood right at the edge of the roof. After that, things took a turn for the worse. Everything was drowned in fog, within which tall, gaunt, asymmetrical figures with multiple limbs could be made out. One glance at them was enough to make your skin crawl. We need to get the rat. Slava was about to rise from his chair, but we forced him back down. It was too late, and everyone understood it. If this was what the fog concealed, then it was better not to go in there at all. Brick it up and forget it ever existed. All the photographs were alike: fog, disturbing figures whose very shapes radiated horror. And the sky, truly an apocalyptic sight, as though an entire ocean of blood loomed overhead. This nightmarish roof of the world was held aloft by 7 colossal columns of pure darkness, each rooted at the base of a massive rock. It was the perfect moment to think of the apocalypse. The thought flashed through my mind just as something scratched on the other side of the shutter. Frozen with fear, we approached the window, cautiously peering around the corner, ready to recoil at any second. The sound repeated, tiny claws scraping against the metal. The rat. Somehow it had escaped its cage and was now scratching, trying to get back inside. Slava lunged toward the window, but Garrick and I restrained him. Opening the window at night, with that cursed fog outside, was profoundly unwise. From beyond the glass came a pitiful squeak, muffled by the shutter and the window, and all the more heartbreaking for it. "Sorry, little one. We should have taken those photos a day earlier." The squeak came again, then suddenly cut off at a high pitch. We stood there, straining to hear something in the silence. Nothing followed. That night we had to drink heavily just to fall asleep. The desperate squealing of the nameless rodent, full of terror and pleading, followed me into my dreams. Morning struck like a forged boot to the head. Every movement brought pain. Garrick and Slava looked battered and dispirited. We spent the entire day coming back to ourselves, and only by evening could we think clearly again, without feeling sick just from shifting the position we had spent most of the day in. We held a council: should we try to retrieve the rodent, if it was still alive? And more importantly, we had to retrieve the cameras. Despite the horror of that world's true appearance, curiosity still lingered within us. The final decision was made. Garrick went to develop the film photographs. Slava and I would retrieve the equipment, and, if possible, the remains of our unfortunate rat. After that, with all of it in hand, we planned to report everything and forget this cursed place forever. When we opened the shutter, we stood there for a good 5 minutes, staring in disbelief. The courtyard had changed. No rivers of blood. No hordes of demons. Instead, patches of paint had peeled away, revealing crimson, twisted symbols beneath the plaster, the same as those on the window, only far more numerous. Far more. On the ground, where we had heard the rat squeal, there was a dark, blood-colored stain. Swallowing the lump in our throats, we still decided to climb. I stayed below the tower, catching the cameras as they were hurriedly dropped down. The uninterruptible power supply was too heavy to bring back. Let it lie there, nothing would happen to it. Though evening had not yet fully arrived, we wanted to get away from this place before the first strip of fog appeared over the edge of the roof. When the last camera landed in my hands, Slava began climbing down the ladder. He froze for a moment, staring off to the side. I followed his gaze, and felt my heart stop. Thin serpents of fog spilled over the edge of the roof and began crawling toward us. "Move!" I shouted at my friend, who had fallen into a stupor. As if waking from a dream, he began scrambling down with frantic urgency. Once he was off the ladder, I rushed for it myself, but the damned place did not want to let me go so easily. A few meters stretched into a desperate 100-meter sprint. I slammed into the winch, making the structure sway. Slava reached me a moment later. I wrapped the camera cables around my forearm and started down the ladder. Slava chose a faster way. He jumped into the winch basket and pulled the lever, releasing the cable. The basket plunged downward. The snapped cable shrieked like a tortured string. My friend's face, twisted in terror, flashed before me. Slava hit the courtyard floor, bruised, but alive. Clambering down the rungs, I tossed the cameras inside and threw down the cable attached to the battery. I prepared to haul him up, but the fog had already spilled over the roof's edge, drifting downward in pale, ashen flakes. Slava grabbed the cable and, snarling and gasping, began to climb. But the thick synthetic rope, designed for heavy loads, was slick, and his sweat-soaked hands betrayed him. After barely 2 meters, he slipped and fell back into the fog, which was already knee-deep. I will never forget his scream. I don't know what the unfortunate rat felt, but I have never heard such pain and agony in a human voice. Slava emerged from the fog. His skin was covered in pea-sized blisters, rapidly filling with some black filth and bursting before our eyes. Drops of the black substance spawned new blisters, which also burst, spraying dark pus and blood. Growling, eyes shining with tears, he tried to climb again. I pulled with all my strength. Seconds later, his hands reached the edge of the balcony. I grabbed him and hauled him up. Together, we collapsed into the room. The window slammed shut, the shutter clanged down, and we lay on the floor, gasping for breath. Slava was murmuring something barely audible. I examined him quickly, and recoiled in horror. His entire body was covered in sores. In places, the skin had blackened and taken on a necrotic look. On barely bending legs, I went for the phone. I needed to call an ambulance. Or the police. Or anyone. My hands shook as I dialed, cursing the idle operators in my mind. Naidu. I jumped and turned around. Slava stood in the doorway. His head was tilted to one side, his jaw hanging slack. A cloudy green fluid dripped from it. Almost all of his skin had turned black and was crusted with scabs. His eyes had sunken deep into their sockets, turning his face into a grotesque, demonic mask. Najaridol, the creature repeated, shuffling toward me. I acted on instinct. I grabbed the meat cleaver hanging beside the kitchen utensils and drove it straight between the creature's eyes. With a choking sound, it collapsed to the floor, twitched a couple of times, and went still. I spent nearly a month in a rehabilitation center. Slowly, the memories faded. The nightmares receded. The grief stopped driving me to the edges of rooftops or the bottoms of bottles. Garrick was found dead in his photo lab. In his hands were overexposed photographs. The film, it seemed, he had burned before his heart gave out. His face was frozen in a mask of terror. I don't know what he encountered, and I don't want to know. My own nightmares are more than enough. The authorities didn't believe me. And who would have? I tried to show them the video recordings, footage that clearly captured a hellish landscape and dozens of figures slowly wandering through the fog. First they dismissed me. Then they nearly committed me to a psychiatric ward. So I turned myself in. Claimed I had killed my friend. That, at least, they couldn't ignore. Slava was listed as missing, and they came to my apartment. By then, all that remained of his body was a heap of decomposing organic matter, but I showed them the window. By that time, the courtyard had changed again. The paint had completely peeled away, and every wall from floor to roof was covered in intricate, horrifying symbols. A week later, people in plain clothes came to visit me. I pretended to believe they were from some research institute. They pretended to believe that I believed them. I told them everything, exactly as it had happened. I don't know what they did there. But a month later, there was a gas explosion in the building. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The next day, I went to see the ruins. There was almost nothing left of the house. Only a couple of load-bearing walls remained, and a lone, slightly crooked window. Beyond it, there was nothing but clear sky. And if you stood in just the right spot, you could also see a fragment of a brick wall marked with dark crimson symbols. I wonder, what if someday rain and bad weather wash away those markings? The crooked lines we once drew with a marker. And what if a random gust of wind were to open that window, warped by time? That's the story we have for today. So, what do you think? Did you like it? Or not? Have you heard it before, or was this your first time? Write in the comments. And now I'll say a few words from myself. Overall, the story worked for me. To be honest, at the beginning it felt a bit compressed. Actually, the whole story feels compressed. The events surrounding the fog develop very abruptly. A lot is left unexplained. But I suspect the author did that deliberately, keeping things vague and undescribed, allowing the reader to fill in the gaps themselves. That, perhaps, is part of the charm. I read it for the first time just now, and despite the sparseness of the descriptions, I visualized everything very clearly. I could see how it all happened. A small house, a second floor. They step out through a window onto the roof, climb up. On the roof, they've built a tower, a kind of makeshift structure with cables. They climbed up there, installed cameras. Somewhere in the distance, ridges were visible. It's quite clear that the author was most likely inspired by Lovecraft. The incomprehensible symbols, the strange language that Slava suddenly began speaking after the fog, all of that carries a faint echo of Lovecraftian style. Just a touch. But regardless, the story as a whole is solid. I do feel sorry for Slava, of course. The guy wanted to survive. It's even possible that he didn't intend to harm or kill the protagonist when he appeared in the doorway. Maybe he was speaking the way he did because his tongue was covered in blisters. What sounded like curses in an alien language could have been a plea for help. And instead, he took an axe to the forehead. So yes, tragic. As for Garrick, it's still unclear why he died. Most likely, he developed the photographs, yes, that's the word, developed them, and saw something so horrifying that it triggered a heart attack. He died with a look of terror frozen on his face, having managed to burn the photographs beforehand. The undeveloped ones. The developed ones. Everything he had seen. All in all, it was good. I liked it. A strong story. It's quite old, actually, published back in 2015. That makes it about 10 years old now. Hopefully you enjoyed it too, especially if you hadn't heard it before. And if you had, I still hope it was worth revisiting. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment if you enjoyed it. See you next time.